In the winter of 1941, the Soviet Union was staring into the abyss of total extinction. The German Wehrmacht was at the gates of Moscow, and the Soviet industrial heartland was being dismantled, loaded onto trains, and shipped thousands of miles into the frozen void of the Ural Mountains to escape the Nazi advance. In this moment of absolute desperation, the Red Army realized a terrifying truth. They weren't just running out of men, they were running out of time to build the weapons those men needed to survive. They needed a production glitch, a weapon that defied the traditional laws of arms manufacturing. The answer was the PPSh-41, a weapon that would become the most produced submachine gun of the war and the literal heartbeat of the Soviet resistance. While the Germans were obsessed with the machining glitch, building the MP-40 with high-precision lathes and expensive, time-consuming processes, Soviet designer Georgy Shpagin realized that in a total war, beauty was a death sentence. He designed the PPSh-41 to be a masterpiece of desperate engineering. It was a weapon made not for master gunsmiths, but for the millions of unskilled workers, teenagers, and grandmothers who were now staffing the relocated Soviet factories. The entire receiver and barrel shroud were made from simple stamped sheet metal, the same cheap steel used to make car fenders and kitchenware. If a factory could make a soup pot, it could now make a submachine gun. The weapon was held together by crude, heavy welds that looked ugly but were structurally indestructible. But the most legendary glitch in the PPSh-41's design was the barrel. With the German army closing in, the Soviets didn't have the machinery to rifling thousands of new barrels. In a stroke of genius that saved the Red Army, they looked at their stockpiles of old 1891 model Mosin-Nagant rifle barrels. They took these long barrels, cut them exactly in half, and chrome-lined the bores. In a single engineering shortcut, they doubled their barrel supply overnight and utilized millions of pieces of obsolete steel. This was the ultimate resource glitch, turning a 19th-century bolt-action rifle into two 20th-century automatic death dealers. The PPSh-41 was a weapon that didn't care about the cold, the mud, or the dust of the steppes. It was a crude, heavy, stamped metal monster that could be built in a basement and fired by a soldier who had only 10 minutes of training. By the time the German High Command realized that their superior precision rifles were being outproduced 10-to-1 by scrap metal, it was already too late. The production glitch had turned the Soviet factory into a weapon of war more powerful than any tank, creating a lead avalanche that was about to roll all the way back to Berlin. When the battle for the Eastern Front moved into the shattered ruins of Stalingrad, the traditional laws of military engagement suffered a total system collapse. In the Rat War, where combat happened in the claustrophobic darkness of sewers, basements, and bombed-out apartment blocks, the bolt-action rifles that had dominated warfare for a century became a lethal liability. This was the birth of the firepower glitch. Soviet commanders realized that at a distance of 20 feet, accuracy didn't matter. Volume of fire was the only god that could save you. They began to exploit this by forming entire submachine gun companies, arming every single soldier in a unit with the PPSh-41. While a German infantry squad was still built around a single machine gunner supported by riflemen, the Soviets deployed a wall of lead where every man was a machine gunner. The PPSh-41 brought a level of lead density to the battlefield that was physically impossible for the Wehrmacht to match. With its massive 71-round drum magazine, a Soviet soldier could enter a room and unleash a continuous spray of 900 rounds per minute, a fire rate so high it earned the nickname the Burp gun, because the individual shots blurred into a single, terrifying roar.
This was the saturation glitch. In the close-quarters carnage of the city, a Soviet soldier didn't need to aim. He simply had to point the weapon in the general direction of a doorway and delete everything in the frame. The weapon's sloped muzzle brake was a primitive but effective piece of engineering that used the escaping gases to force the barrel down, allowing even an untrained conscript to keep the gun on target during a full-auto dump. For the German soldiers, encountering a PPSh-equipped unit was a psychological glitch. They were used to the ping-pop rhythm of rifle fire, not a relentless mechanical chainsaw of lead that never seemed to need reloading. The 71-round drum meant a Soviet soldier could fire for nearly 5 seconds straight, while a German with an MP40 was forced to reload his 32-round magazine twice in that same window. This disparity was so overwhelming that German stormtroopers began discarding their own high-quality MP40s to scavenge the crude Soviet drums from the battlefield. They realized that in the chaos of Stalingrad, the Soviet glitch was the only thing that worked. The PPSh-41 didn't just win individual rooms, it broke the German tactical manual. It proved that a cheap stamped metal drum filled with pistol ammunition could stop the most professional army in the world by simply making the environment too dangerous to exist in. The firepower glitch turned the ruins of the Soviet Union into a meat grinder that consumed the German army one burp at a time.
As the Red Army turned the tide and began its relentless surge toward the heart of Germany, the PPSh-41 evolved from a tool of survival into the ultimate victory glitch. By 1944, the Soviet industrial machine had perfected the art of the lead avalanche. They were no longer just defending their homes, they were using a mathematical imbalance of firepower to erase the Wehrmacht from the map. The victory glitch was a simple but brutal equation. The Soviets had realized that in the chaos of a modern offensive, the side that could put the most metal into the air the fastest would almost always win. While the German army was suffering from a complexity glitch, struggling to maintain high-tech Tigers and Panthers that broke down in the mud, the Soviets were flooding the plains of Europe with millions of soldiers carrying a weapon that had only 2 moving parts and could be cleaned with a kerosene-soaked rag. This was the moment the PPSh-41 became a strategic macro glitch. Entire Soviet divisions were now outfitted as tank descent units, soldiers who rode on the back of T-34 tanks directly into the mouth of German defenses. When the tanks reached the enemy trenches, these soldiers would leap off, unleashing a 360-degree storm of 900 rounds per minute. It was a level of mobile, high-volume fire that no defensive line in history had ever been designed to withstand. The Germans, who prided themselves on tactical precision, found themselves paralyzed by a Soviet army that had simply glitched the rules of engagement. You cannot execute a tactical retreat when the air around you is literally made of lead. The final act of this industrial glitch took place in the streets of Berlin. In the ultimate irony of the war, the city that had planned to conquer the world was systematically dismantled by a weapon made of car parts and old rifle barrels. As Soviet soldiers stormed the Reichstag, the distinct burp of the PPSh-41 echoed through the halls of German power, serving as the final punctuation mark on the Third Reich. When the victory flag was finally raised over the ruins, the stamped steel silhouette of Spagen's creation stood as the ultimate symbol of the Eastern Front. It proved that a cheap weapon isn't a weakness, it's a strength. The PPSh-41 didn't just win a war, it proved that a mobilized industrial democracy or state could overwhelm superior technology through the sheer unyielding volume of a manufacturing glitch.
The refrigerator mechanics had built a lead avalanche, and it had buried the eagle of the Reich forever.